My name is Katja Hogendoorn. I'm from the University of Adelaide, and we have been doing this work together with Richard Glatz, the director from the Strees Entomology, and Remco Leijs from the South Australian Museum. But in actual fact, I'm going to tell you what we are doing partly in our spare time, because this is spare time work, really. The green carpenter bee is a very iconic bee. It's the largest bee in South Australia and one of the largest bees in Australia. It's about 1.5 centimeters long, maybe 2. It's very long-lived for a bee, so it lives longer than a year as an adult. It's got very interesting primitively social nesting, where there's generation overlap and lots of opportunity for competition between family members for nesting substrates and things like that. It's got a number of alternative mating strategies, which makes it also interesting to study. And it is a buzz-pollinating species, which means that certain plants that require that depend on bees, this bee and similar bees, for their seed set. So the species is used to be distributed, let me see, how do I do that? Yeah, all along the coast here and on Kangaroo Island, and is now extinct in Victoria and mainland South Australia, occurs around Sydney and on the western half of Kangaroo Island. The cause of extinctions we can only guess about, but because we didn't study it. It's obviously that habitat clearing has a lot to do with that. The species needs large bushland areas, and I will soon show why. But the Grampians happens to be a suitable large bushland area, and it used to occur there until the 1940s. So habitat clearing is not the only reason why it completely disappeared. And we think that its disappearance is, the reason for its disappearance is also fire history. And that is what I'm going to talk about now. Okay, so why would fire affect carpenter bees? Well, as I said, the adults are very long-lived. They are always adults there. They produce only 1 generation per year, very sometimes 2, and they have an obligate overlap of generations. So the mother has to be there when the young develop and come out. And so there always needs to be food in about a 2-kilometer range, because that is where they forage. And that food's got to be there nearly throughout the year, definitely when it's warm enough to forage. And then the nesting material is another reason why they are vulnerable. They nest in wood, and wood burns. And they depend on 2 main nest substrates, and the availability of both is related to fire. The first nest substrate is grass tree stalks. And grass tree stalks, grass trees flower profusely after fire, and then the stalks dry and remain suitable for nesting in for about 3 to 6 years after fire. Second substrate is trunks of Banksia marginata, and here you see that its distribution, so you can understand why the original distribution of the bees was like that. Banksia marginata, they need dead trunks of a certain thickness that have lost their side branches, that have an entire bark around it, that have acquired white rods, so the wood gets soft. And once that's all happened, that's suitable for 5 to 8 years after dying. It can be killed by fire, or it can be killed naturally. The regeneration after fire is interesting. There's recruitment from seed only. Banksia doesn't live after fire. The Banksia will flower when it's 10 to 15 years old. It then needs to die, dry, and lose its side branches and all of that. So it would be, new substrate would be available the first time about 20 years after fire. So if you would burn something, you shouldn't burn more than, the bees need to use that substrate as well. You shouldn't burn more often than 25 years, every 25 years really, for this bee species to persist. So let's explain that in a model. Here we have a fire occurrence happening, a single large fire. We have got our grass tree stalks. We have got our Banksia that died after the fire. The grass tree stalks after that muddled on a bit. And here we have our regenerating Banksia trunks that can be used by the bees. So when you have a single large burn of a big area, there is very soon after about 10 years nothing there for the bees. When you have small fires in different, first I'm going to do this. When you have two fires within a short period of each other, what happens is you have your dead grass tree stalks, you have your dead Banksia, you will have another bunch of grass tree stalks, but you will not have the regeneration of the Banksia after that. And that is, I think, largely what might have happened in the Grampians, because in the 40s there were two such big fires consecutively. So what this species needs is mosaics of fires that happen small patches, and that will allow a continuous amount of different nesting substrates to be available over time. It's got to be reasonably close by so that they can recolonize patches, but they're good flyers, so they can fly fairly far. Okay, so let me see. So let's see how the fire then might have influenced the occurrence on the island. This is the historical distribution where bees were caught before 2003. And what we see is that the main number of bees caught were in Flinders Chase, which is here, but there were also bees caught all over the island elsewhere. Okay, so in 2003, McKilby and Lees did a survey of the island, and all the red roads are roadsides that have been surveyed, and what you see is they found two spots. The red ones are the historical spots, of course. Two spots, one with a nest in a grass tree, one with a nest in Banksia, outside Flinders Chase National Park. And for the rest, all nests that they found were found inside Flinders Chase National Park. So we thought, well, there's a bit of a westward move here. Maybe that's to do with habitat clearance in the east. And that's very possible. Because also all the vegetation, suitable vegetation, which is yellow here, is very patchy on the island by now. Okay, so would fire affect nesting substrate? Well, we have good maps now, and we can put the map of fire frequency next to the map of the distribution that we found in 2002. And what you can see is that in areas that are very frequently burned, and these burns are so frequent for property protection, that the bees do not occur there, even though there is suitable nest habitat there. Often the Banksia nest substrate is very, very small there. Okay, so there is some indication to think that. And after that, we sort of went away and did a lot of other things. And then a big fire happened, of course, in 2007. This fire was incidentally lit by lightning, but what got to huge proportions thanks to backburning and wind changes. So in the end, the whole Flinders Chase burnt down, really. Apart from some little patches there and there and there, you know. But so we were wondering, well, what happens with those bees? And this is an opportunity to start investigating after a long-term burn. But we only really started to worry about that in 2011 when we went and visited the island and thought, there's something wrong here. So we applied for some money, and we, in 2012, which is just in that gap, we went and visited the island, and there were two aims. It was a collaborative project with UNA, with Robin Molscher, who's here, and there were two aims to that: raise public awareness for the bee, collaborate with UNA, make fire management aware of this relationship, and also survey the distribution, look at the current nesting substrate and what the future will hold for this bee. Okay, so we promoted awareness. 40 people participated in the surveys. The managing authorities know about the effects of fire. The areas are now checked for nests before burning, and the green carpenter bee now features abundantly in Kangaroo Island art. So yes, people know about it. So the results of the survey were very interesting. We had Banksia nests, quite large numbers, in areas that hadn't been burning for 60 years. We had some Banksia nests here along Shackle Road in areas that hadn't been burnt that heavily, and we had nests in Xanthorrhoea stalks along further west. Those Xanthorrhoea stalks were getting old at this stage. Okay. So, good news and bad news. Initial recolonization was far into the park. There's several nests. There is a source population present, but the prospects were rather grim. There was a low density of both substrates, and there's one of those spots where the old nests was listed for a prescribed burn. So we recently returned, and we found no more Xanthorrhoea nests, well, one here. We found very small Banksia that desperate bees have been trying to dig nests in, because these Banksias were this thin and very low, and you wouldn't think that they would be able to nest there. But the source population in the unborn areas was still there. So what we have done now is try to develop artificial nest substrate. We first tried nesting boards, which we had done before. The bees nested in there, and we had good overwintering nests the first year, but there was little nest reuse and no uptake of new nests. We found new nests in Banksia in the surrounding vegetation, so we put a Banksia, a real Banksia, and that was very attractive. We treated balsa wood with Banksia extract, but that had no effect on the uptake. And now we are thinking about shape to use artificial grass tree stalks and artificial Banksia trunks. We've just designed them. We heard yesterday that we've got new funding to introduce them to see if they can be taken up. So that is what's going to happen, and if that works, we're going to do a fundraiser, adopt a carpenter bee nest. We will keep talking with Kangaroo Island Fire Management about fuel reduction burns, which they do, and we will continue monitoring nest and substrate availability. And we want to find funds to quantify population size with microsatellites, which there's good reason to do. So I'd like to thank all people who collaborated in this and who funded this. Thank you for your attention.